thank you both and everybody, of course, who decided to join us today. I really loved some of the things that you shared, and I found them profound. And you will see also scarily aligned with some of the things that I shared, that I'm going to share with you today that I prepare. So Daniel and Armel, really, it's hard to speak after you. To everybody else, I'm going to share my screen now. Please, I know that you see a lot, there is a lot of slides, but don't worry, you will see that it's actually quite visual. So you should see my screen now. There, it's my contact or social handles for anyone who wants to reach out later. And of course, hello to everybody. I really appreciate, especially in these times with so much Zoom fatigue and so much online, and screen time, for you to be here. So I will do my very best, at the best of my capacity, to share with you things that I hope will help you shed some light on your journey of impact and sustainability. And of course, I will start introducing myself. My full name is Meg Pagani, but after so many years abroad, and especially in Latin America, with my name miswritten so many times, please call me Meg. And also, you don't see me now compared to traditional events because we are all seated, but I'm basically a very tall blonde giraffe from Italy. I very much don't look Italian at all. I live in Lisbon, Portugal, actually slightly outside, actually really, really close to the Nova University, but I come from a super small town in the north of Italy. And my journey in somehow finding my own path and doing things my way started quite early. You can in fact see me here when at about 2 years old, I packed my stuff, my favorite, puppet, and I went downstairs to my parents to tell them that it was time for me to leave because there was so much to be done and so much to be explored, and something was not making sense. And my parents, I was lucky enough to be born in a family that they not only captured this on picture, but they also allowed me to get out and explore. And that's a story for some other time. But that's how early I somehow made clear that I would go my own way somehow. For those of you that might know a little bit of what I do today, so technology, entrepreneurship, etc. Normally the assumption is that I studied finance. It actually happens every time that I'm asked, what did you study? And in fact, nothing more far, because I studied fine arts. My training happened, 2 years in Milan, in Brera, and then 1 year in Bilbao. And while all my colleagues today were trained by lines of code and spreadsheets, these are the types of lines of code that trained me. I'm also the daughter of a theologist and a psychologist, so that combined with the fact that I had training with fine art really taught me that the story that we tell to ourselves or that we paint in our community spaces like this one, because at the time they were community spaces, the only places we would know outside of our home, are really powerful when it comes to shape our own beliefs and behaviors. So the stories we tell ourselves about how society works, what's leadership, what's the role of a man or a woman, what should we fear, and how should we behave, are really powerful. And as we're going to see today, those are some of the questions they were actually putting under discussion and critics nowadays. So as mentioned, I studied in Brera. I did 1 year in Bilbao. I was also a professional volleyball player. And I graduated in 2011 with a thesis on sociology, psychology, and art. So already shifting a little bit towards these things that I work with today. And of course, for those of you that were already reading about socioeconomic stuff at the time, you can imagine that graduating in fine arts in 2011 meant with this package, of course, of passions. So not only art, but also technology or in sociology or public policy even, which I'm very passionate about. This was me in 2011. It was very, very hard for me with a fine art degree and all these passions to find a place where I could express myself, not even fully, but at least barely including some of my passions and my purposes. Then luckily for me, I have decided my urgency to explore the world to take over. I started in 2012 and up to 2020 to travel and work nowadays up to about 30 countries. Especially I lived 5 years in Latin America, more or less, and I studied models of social innovation and sustainability from all these countries and different cultures, and sometimes even very different philosophies, as we're going to see together today. And one of the things that really struck with me as I was doing all these travels and research and leading first another project and then the one that I'm going to tell you about today, is that we tend to forget that our brains, everybody's brain, we are actually wired for compassion and for empathy. We are wired, as you can see in this scheme, for being exposed to painful information about social challenges or environmental crises, etc., and to actually develop this empathy curve. What we are not that aware of, though, and really I became super passionate about this, is that if we keep being exposed to this information like we do on our phones or on medias today, but we don't have those epiphany and will points that I'm going to talk to you about in a moment, we actually can get very easily stuck in a mode of like burnt out and shut down, because our brain is wired to observe these things and act upon it. We're not wired to just absorb all this information and then not have actionable ways, so epiphany in this scheme, to actually act upon it and go back up. And I became very passionate about this because when we get stuck there in burnout or shutdown, which in some degrees probably all of us have experienced some of this. For example, how many of us stopped, at least for a while, at some moment, to read the news because it was too much anxiety and too much overwhelming of information for us to digest, and we felt not having the agency or the tools to actually act upon it. Or how many of us know people that completely detached in apathy from things like, or topics so important like the refugee crisis or sustainability or human rights or so on. This is what happens, and this is what I became very, very passionate about. Because the consequence in terms of society when we go there is that apathy also is dangerously close to depression, to wanting to exclude the different because it's too much for us to digest, and it can lead all the way to what we know as violence, extremism, exclusion, etc., because our brain also is wired to respond to the environment, to the same violence we subjectively perceive. So the violence we perceive is the one that we develop in one way or another, and it can be in society, or it can be with eating disorders, it can be with depression, or so on. And I was in Italy in 2015 doing research with a group of cyber activists that really made me understand that I wanted to do something about this. And that's how impact-on.org was created. This is a project that I founded at the end of 2017 with the goal of really going from replicating to multiplying impact, because what we do is that we identify proven models of social impact and sustainability that have the characteristics to be replicated, adapted, and even improved in multiple countries, in multiple locations at the same time, using knowledge transfer technology. So really the projects that we work with, for example, this one, they use non-recyclable plastic. So the one that, for example, we get out of ocean or landfill that normally we can't recycle because the fibers have been ruined. And they compress it, including packaging. They compress it in these building blocks, and they employ women or young men from favelas or vulnerable communities to build houses that are actually incredibly beautiful. And they can be up to 1/3 or 1/4 of the cost of prefabricated ones. Or this one that I really much love, that was created to be developed in countries where people need to migrate for the absence of healthy food or water. This is a low-cost hydroponic systems that use recycled PVC tubes and solar panels. And with 1/10 of the water compared to traditional agriculture, you can grow up to 17 different vegetables and fruits for your own use or to be placed in local markets. And it's been specifically designed to be also adjusted so that it can be managed with people by people in wheelchair, for example. And the last example of many, another of my favorite, this project figured out a way to reduce recidivism. Recidivism is the amount of people that get out of jail and then falls back because the clash with society or the other communities is too hard. And it's not necessarily for track record. People believe that the fallback of inmates is because of that, but it's actually because sometimes during decades, they cannot express their emotions. This is for men and women alike. This project figured out that even with just 2 months of a program where you match a jail with dog shelter, you can, for 1 week, for example, you can bring once per week the dogs either at the jail or in parks, because sometimes the inmates that are about to get out of jail already can do some work or work out at parks. So the first week you pair them. The second week they play. The third week you start training them. And nobody can express emotions or hug in jails, but everybody is allowed to do that with puppies. And what happens in the moment in which some of these inmates start to be able to express their emotions and process, everybody does. And so you break down those barriers, actually not only reconnecting with emotions, but with the expression of emotions, which is one of the most fundamental things that they will need once they get back home, or they will want to access to a job, etc. These projects are highly replicable. This can be done, for example, in every city of the world where there is a jail. Imagine the potential, and today these projects don't scale. This is some of our numbers today, but the journey is very, very long. About 25 projects, about 200 applications, a few thousands of users, and more every month. Really, most people, when we talk about impact on, think that our focus is to spread what works, and of course it is. But if you remember the scheme that I just shared with you, it's actually that epiphany moment what really drives me and wakes me up every day. Because I would love to create, together with the team, of course, as many chances as possible for people to go from I can't to wait, maybe I can. And by offering toolkits or recipes of projects that can be replicated with your own skills, your own powers, is our way to contribute to the transitions that Armel and Daniela were talking about earlier. So really the two levels in which we do this, and then I'll stop talking about this and more about what we can do together. One is an impact on academy or non-academy, as we like to call it. This is for everybody that wants to, which is going to be launched with limited access in April. It's for anyone that wants to understand more about the strategies of impact and sustainability and how to apply them in any sphere of our society. So it can be your workplace, it can be your university, the company you're joining, or your own project. And then, of course, the second one is the replication programs that we are already been running for a while. And the next batch is going to be in June this year. So as I mentioned, I'm founder of impact.org. I'm a TEDx speaker, Forbes 30 Under 30, and I'm part of, for example, the World Economy Forum and the Global Shapers. And the reason why I'm saying you this is because I want to slowly shift to the messages and the reflections that I prepare for us today. And in particular, there is this quote that I love from Mariana Mazzucato, the economist, that says, if you know there is evidence that your own work can contribute, you should have the courage to get involved. And I love this phrase very much because if you have seen, what is my background from fine art and volleyball to the topics that we're talking about today, you can only imagine the amount of imposter syndrome and ideas that I had in terms of I should not get involved. I don't have the background. I don't have the skills. I don't have the knowledge. But it's not the case. And I think that this represents a lot of us in terms of that generation that I will talk about later, about that they just always struggle with how things are done and things could be done differently, and maybe wants to contribute to do so. And so a reminder that I wanted to leave is that we don't have the perk to encounter systems that were designed for us. As women, as people from different backgrounds, as people from different cultures that we're going to see. So let's stop expecting that. And let's come together more and more in moments like this to figure out what are the skills that we can develop and the muscles to navigate those systems without expecting them to be designed for us because they weren't. And it's not the idea. And we're here to develop different ones. So really with my background and everything that I just shared with you, you can imagine, especially with the travels, that I started developing a perspective and seeing the planet really like an organism, way beyond these imaginary lines that we call borders, especially when it comes to climate change. And the evolving big picture as well. And it's interesting because I started having a reflection, and for those of you that are nerd like me, you know where this quote comes from. I started having a perspective in terms of the shifts in paradigms that we're seeing right now on a global level. And I call it the old gods and the new because we're talking about an old paradigm and another one emerging. And I choose to use the word gods that is very loaded, of course, for many of us and many of our cultures, because in reality, it is about that. It is about a system that has a very specific set of values, of behaviors around devotion, dedication, and disciples, and makes us really disciples of this way of thinking about the economy that doesn't have to be this way, but it has been for a long time. So we need to somehow take a step back and see what is the shift happening so we can navigate it better. Because while we probably in 2019 and 20 in particular, we understood that we want to go for an economy blended first, we need to accept that we very much are in an extractive economy now. One that is based on two main things. One is the illusion of infinity and the obsession with permanence, of course, that is related to that, the illusion that we can extract as much as possible from nature and that's going to be fine. And the second is the concept of value. Because the system and the economy where we are right now is one that knows how to put a price and a value and a number on a dead whale on a boat somewhere, but not on an alive whale in her or his ecosystem doing what he or she is supposed to be doing for an ecosystem that we actually depend on. And these are the type of questions, borderline philosophical and existential, that we are faced with today. And I think we have been facing or asked to be faced these questions for a very long time. And we just got to the limit, I guess, of being able to ignore them. And this, for me, really brings up a concept in Italian ritorno, like a return moment. Because it's a little bit as collectively we are, if we look at a hero journey, very known, we are a little bit there. Like after doing many things and fighting against, whatever challenges we had in the past, we now are in a moment in which we are asked to return and think about why are we doing things the way we're doing them in order for us to do them in a different way. And it's funny because when I started researching around this, to my utter surprise, I discovered that I had more knowledge than I thought to be useful for this type of research, because I found the roots of this in the period of Renaissance. One of the periods of humanity that, of course, we consider the most positive actually have the roots of the challenges that we are trying to face today. And why is that? As some of you might know, around that time, we had a very big shift in paradigms. Like we went from thinking that the Earth was at the center of the universe, to understanding that it was actually the sun at the center of the solar system. So the universe became this sort of vast, unknown territory, all to be explored and all to be conquered somehow. And if that was on the macro level, on the micro level, there was a just important shift that started to happen. As some of you might know, slightly before Renaissance and slightly overlap with it, there was another period called humanism. Humanism is that moment where on micro level, we started deciding, well, if the universe is unknown and it has to be conquered, the most fit to conquer it all is mankind. In particular, at the time, white male men, like it was not as inclusive at all. So we started shaping a belief system that was man-centered, where man is owner of his destiny, where the role of man is the domination of nature and of the wild. And you can only start to imagine how dangerous that is when we start considering not only men above and separated from nature, but also above and separated from cultures that a specific part of the planet started declaring savage or more wild. Some of the consequences on culture and racial justice, we're seeing them today. Renaissance was the application of that knowledge and belief system. Science flourished because we needed tools to face those challenges. And especially we started having this idea that we want an immediate reward, that we want to extract value as much as possible, and we want it now, and we want it more. The consequences of that we're seeing today. And I'm putting here just the environmental side, because I'm sure that I need to remember to anyone the social and cultural and racial aspect of what's happening now in the world. To me, this is really important because we are at another of those macro shifts. We're going from mankind is the center of the universe and must dominate nature to mankind is part of the universe and must honor nature. And I choose honor as a word specifically because it's about a bow, like a honoring, a devotion to nature, to a nature that we probably need to remember we're part of and not above or better. So really, when we think about sustainability and social innovation, while most of us might think that is more of a stretch outward and this unknown to be conquered or to be created, to me, it's actually a stretch inward. It's a return to really look at the roots of why we do the way we do, why we do things the way we do them, and how can we rewire the roots for the rest of the tree to change instead of trying to just patch the branches in one way or another. And this is what really made me create one of the latest initiatives under Revolutionary that Armel was mentioning before, which is the other side of impact. It's also a monthly newsletter. I can tell you all the details later, but the other side of impact is a project that is focused on somehow revealing these hidden and unseen dimensions of impact and sustainability so that we can learn how to practice around them and really work from the roots and not from the branches. One topic, for example, and I'm not going to share it all with you today, just giving you a preview of the topic of March, because every month we have a different topic and I send it out in the newsletter. Archetypes of changemakers. We tend to forget that there is very different ways of creating impact in the world. We tend to have a hero or a ruler approach in terms of archetype that has very specific behaviors and approaches, or caregiver, right, from the nonprofit and charity sector. But there's many other archetypes that actually have behaviors and set of values that see impact and or positive change with completely different perspectives. And we don't know those archetypes. And if we don't know them, we can't try to embody them, or we can't try to find new ways of creating change. Or codependency versus empowerment. We historically call impact projects, not all of them, of course, but there is a vast majority of social projects that actually create codependency between countries or between communities, instead of creating a space for local communities to develop their own tools and be able to use them on their own in full agency. But again, theories of change by conflict or by integration. We have a theory of change, that change happened because the good win over the bad, or we need to save that country from the evil and we're going to go there even if it's not our culture at all. Historically, we have these stories, and while I'm not very interested in spending too much time on how much I might disagree with that or my resentment from that, reality is that is in the past. And what I care about is to shed light as much as possible on these, unseen laws of impact and these other side of impact, so that we can try to start doing things differently, like with integration. And then the topic of this month, for example, that I'm going to give you a preview about, because the newsletter is going to go out tomorrow for this month, and we also have community calls, decoding our wound-driven purpose. And why do I talk about that? I used for this topic the art of kintsugi. You might be familiar with that. It's these like golden broken pieces of pottery that are pulled back together and with these like golden decorations. Because it reminds me of the fact that we tend to forget that those of us that care so much about sustainability and impact normally do them, or have so much caring, because there is something in what we see in social and environmental challenges that actually is in tune with or resonates with something we felt. Have you ever noticed that there is like many different social or environmental challenges around the world, but you resonate more with some and not too much with others, even if you rationally acknowledge that, of course, they're very, very important? There is a way to decode this sort of match, this sort of like resonance that we normally don't even reflect on. And I definitely didn't for a very long time. But for me, some patterns or some types of impact causes resonate a lot deeper than others. So for example, in the topic of this month, we explored this, and we explore how we can decode at least part of this resonance, this sound that we feel with some or the other, so we can understand better how we can act from our core, that in Latin comes from core, from heart, how we can act really in extension and in alignment with our heart. For any of you that is interested in these very extremely nerd topics on impact, you can find a way to sign up for the newsletter on my site, and every other information of the past topics and future initiatives is all there. So really going towards the closing for this, because I really would love to hear all your questions. Of course, after thinking about all this, and the question that just arises, like, okay, who should do this? Who should redesign the way we do things? And all of us here have been designed, in terms of culture, etc., to think that it's our leaders, be it the government, being our bosses, being our teachers. We have this idea that the past generation should know better. But this does not apply to profoundly transitional and pivotal moments in history like the ones that we're living, wanting it or not. I do believe that we are that generation. And I really believe that, like it or not, we need to develop completely different muscles and perspectives and lenses to have the impact that we want to have, and do it in coordination, in alignment with a lot of other people. This is a paradigm that I call growth and contribution, because it talks about a shift that I see in the idea of profession that actually Armel and Daniela were talking about earlier, that is closer to an idea of personal growth or professional growth. Of course, we all want to learn and do better and better, financially, professionally, in terms of skills, but also service at the very same time. And not service, in a monastic way necessarily, but service as a way to, at every step, do a collective contribution with the actions that we choose or the steps that we choose to take. Because we're going from a two-steps economy. I do well, and then I give back. I accumulate stuff, and then I donate a very small portion of it somewhere or to someone, to a very much, to a deeper integration of these two dimensions that is really grounded in we and in oneness, that does not lie anymore to ourselves and to others about this linear and binary system that is really not working. So we need to figure out a way to actually live and develop from that paradigm of growth and contribution at every step, which to me is a story of value, because we all have a set of asset, talents, and vocation. Especially the talents are the ones that we don't consider too much because it was natural for us since forever. And so sometimes we struggle in understanding how we can integrate them in what we do for a living. And then there is ways in which not only we can decode that power, but also identifying in alignment with our unique toolbox, what is the best sphere of influence that we already have. Sometimes we think that it needs to be big or it needs to be, massive to have an impact. You need to have a big audience or many resources and stuff. The reality is that very small spheres of influence, but very well aligned, work like a tissue or an organ. And they're way more effective in the change that we need to have in these historical times instead of the pyramidal one, that is the one that we know historically. So really thinking about not only connecting with our power, but understanding what's our sphere of influence so that we can act like the cells of a body or the cells of a tissue. And from there, identifying in alignment with power and sphere of influence, what is the best steering point for us? What's the best way, in what environment, with what proposal for us to start creating the change that we believe in and that is aligned with who we are and what we stand for. So really to close, a few reminders to everybody and to myself, because it's never enough to be reminded of this. Endings are never linear. Even if we know that there is a very old normal that some of us might be hoping that it's going to come back, or some of us might be feeling that it's a little bit back and it's around us. To me, it works, it reminds me of, those stars that are in the sky and they're still theoretically shining, but they've been off and dead for quite a long time. The reason why we still see the light is for a glitch in physics. It doesn't exist anymore. We see the light for a while, but it already doesn't exist. And for me, it's important because it's a reminder that to be gives me a lot of strength in the days in which, challenges might feel too overwhelming. And to remind myself that this is a journey of transition and bridge building. The bridge building that every single one of us is asked to start putting in practice at whatever level we can. It is a word that I love that we tend not to know, at least not out of certain context, because pontifex is actually from Latin and it means bridge maker. And I do believe that this is a call that we have right now, everybody. I would love to tell you that this bridge making is going to be looking like this, but I do believe, or sadly know, that it's going to probably look a little bit more like that. And that's why I believe that this is going to be a very important moment in history to choose how we can come together and train and develop muscles and skills that might have never been or looked important before, but now they become fundamental. Because the reminder number 3 and the last one is that we get to be lighthouses and we are designed for it. For ourselves and for others, we can be in storms as big as this one that I'm sure most of you know is Nazaré and is from last year. I had the pleasure and the honor to be there and witness such powerful storm and nature expression. We get to be lighthouses. We are designed to be creative. We are designed to connect with our unique creative powers to figure out from the surrounding challenges, what can we do to go through it? And we are designed also to do it for ourselves and for others in very different roles. And really to close, I do believe in Italian that la bellezza salverà il mondo, which means beauty will save the world. And I don't refer to the fine arts type of beauty or the aesthetics type of beauty, but the beauty that we feel when we understand that we have the ability to respond. We have the responsibility, therefore the opportunity to rethink, to redefine, to rebuild, to return as many times we want to what is our core, what do we believe in, and what do we want to do from there. Thank you very much. Of course, I would love to have to listen to all your questions, and I hope I didn't go too much over my time.
You're perfectly in your time, Meg, and thank you so much for the super inspiring last half hour. I took so many notes and don't even know where to start for the question. So I'm actually gonna pass it on to somebody else. I know there were some raised hands in the audience earlier, so I would really invite you all to just unmute yourselves, start a conversation. That's also why we're here. I think there was a lot of food for thought, food for inspiration, for responsibility, for action. So I would love to hear what all of you thoughts, questions you have for Meg, and just, yeah, let's get this conversation started.
Please don't think that any of your question will be stupid. I promise you it will not, because I shared a lot of nerdy stuff as well. So please, just any question is more than welcome.
Hi, Meg. First of all, I enjoyed a lot your presentation. I think it was great. And I have the following question regarding your impact on entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And this, how does it work if you want to replicate a project? You know, I mean, for example, the example you gave about the houses, how do you replicate it? Does the founder of the idea goes and work to the other country where it's going to be implemented? Or what is the role of impact on? Do you coordinate resources, or how does it work?
So it's a very brilliant question. So thank you so much. And of course, thank you for being here. We work in the following way. On one side, when there is a project in sustainability or impact that already works, we do a very hands-on analysis with a methodology that is a mix between stuff that we came up with and stuff that already are out there about the scaling impact. Because we analyze what are the elements that must remain the same and the ones that need to be replicated or adapted, better said, adapted or improved for every different context. So we don't go and do the replication. What we do is that we create batches. Imagine as if it is an incubation program, but instead of working from zero on your own idea, you actually are learning about an existing project and acquiring a lot of different tools to question the assumption, validate them on your own, in your own environment, and also a batch, imagine 10, 15, 20 people from different parts of the world that are trying to do the same. So you actually have different cultures and perspectives coming together, trying to solve or translate this recipe for the local communities. That's why we do batches, because we figured out that replication in autonomy is good, but is a lot more powerful when, of course, people are not left to do them on their own. Something that we wanted to do also on top of this starting last year, but then the pandemic made it quite hard, and we might be in the process of actually making it better this year, is that we started being approached by companies that figured out that they might want to give grants to people that want to replicate a proven project instead of people that want to come up with ideas from zero, because the impact and the risk as well for them is very different. So we see the opportunity to develop scholarships with these companies. We are currently, I can't spoil this, I really can't, but we are talking with a group also for Portugal, because we believe that a lot of the projects that we have, especially on the non-recyclable plastic that we take out of the ocean or the beaches, could be very, very powerful for a country like Portugal. So we are speaking with different companies to make this happen. So that as well. And then last but not least, we created basically as I was saying, the non-academy, this way in which, or this place where maybe you don't know yet which project you want to replicate. Maybe you're not sure yet about your interest or skills. So imagine as if the non-academy is like an homeopathic doses of a replication program. Like you meet experts, you get to ask questions, you understand the case study, you have some exercises and reflections to see if the project is right for you before choosing if you want to replicate any of them. But you have a different one every month, and you get to meet and network and ask questions to the originators or to professionals that embed their impact in their journey in a very different way. So it's not just people who created projects, it's also like lawyers that work for human rights or coders that work for open source technology for Syria, for example. So we have prepared that, and we're very excited because we understood that from the projects and the networks that we have, we could create an extra layer of access and really training, but in a peer-to-peer way and in community, even without necessarily going for replication of the projects. Because these strategies, as Armel was saying at the beginning, we really believe that it could and there should be embedded in many other organizations, not just in replicating a specific project, but we believe in both. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Any other question?
People are always so shy on Zoom. I'll take the
Actually, can I? Armel, thank you, Armel and Meg, for your intervention, and Daniela also. It was very useful. And I just wanted to ask, and I know this might seem biased because I'm managing the implementation of the new masters, and I also was a career consultant in NovSV, but I just wanted to ask, since you mentioned a lot about your background, which was not obvious of what you're doing now, I just wanted to ask, like, what are for someone that is now starting to study or to choose their path, what would you advise? Like, go for different courses, or go for business, or don't go to college at all? What is your main feeling, since you work so much with different organizations and different people around the world, both of you? I think it's
a very important question. I was actually doing another session, a little bit similar to this, with about 300 students earlier from Italy. From high school, last years of high school, and they need now to choose their studies. So the pressure in 2021 might be pretty heavy. I would not want to be in their shoes, but the thing that I truly profoundly believe in, and it took me some time to decode it for my own journey, is that at some point I did feel like, as I was mentioning, that these things that I care about wouldn't be possibly like pieced together. So I was interested in things that, and I was exposed to a lot of critics as well from my environment in terms of I was doing things that didn't make sense. My suggestion is that linearity works for very few of us. There is extremely profoundly impactful roles in the world, I mean, research, in academia, in tech, in whatever, where if you are the person that enjoys just a very niche thing, then absolutely go for it. But if you don't, my suggestion, it's a metaphor that I always use. I use it also with myself, and I profoundly believe in it. Remember that you're a boat, or you have your own boat, but there is also a current. There is, like, I don't know, sounds or serendipitous stuff, or just things, hunches that you have about things that you care about and you want to embed in your work, or even just explore or learn, even if you don't know how. Go for it, because you might be, and this is a real story, you might be making an interview for a role that is fairly technical, or even in sales, but your passion about a specific sport, or your passion about sustainability and impact actually will enable you to create value on many different levels, just one tag. That is the paradigm that we're going for. And therefore, if you don't follow those like whispers, or those hunches, or those serendipitous coincidences, you're somehow disconnecting from something within yourself that I call subtle signs or trembling signs. They're always subtle, but they are always about you. I think every single one of us that has been in a serendipitous moment, maybe with friends, we would turn and the friends didn't see it. I do believe that life speaks to you in a language that is just yours, and only you can understand it, and only you can decode it, nobody else. We can figure out some patterns in common, but I think that following those sounds, or whatever, those trembling signs, is super important. And it might be very scary, because we are scared of not having success, or not being accepted, or being criticized in our choices, or that our choices will not make sense and will make us lose the love or the appreciation from who is around us. But there is one appreciation that you cannot lose, and is the one of yourself. If you ignore these signs, and believe me, I have tried for a very long time to try to make sense for others, because my background and journey didn't make sense for a long time, and I really suffered. I learned that it's very important to just follow those trembling signs. So go for it. Even if it doesn't make sense, it will. I promise. It will at some time, at some point.
Fabiana, I think you have your hand up. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, I would like to thank you all for your presentations. It's really inspiring, and I really like to see that there are more people out there who want to do the same as I feel, personally talking, I feel like doing. I just wanted to, actually, my question was really similar to Rita's question, so I will go more in detail. And I would just like to ask you, I know it's a typical question, but what kind of abilities or skills will you enhance to become these changers, agents? For example, I know courage is something very important to make changes, and what other skills or I don't like to call it skills, but maybe abilities a person should have to make this possible?
I think the only ability, or one of the abilities we really need to develop, and especially as women, but in general our generation, is to stop shooting ourselves. Like, we should do this, we should do that. And I'm very bad at that. So I definitely am with you. We shouldn't do anything. I really don't think we should anything in particular. And I'm telling you that because I'm learning it myself. I really think that the skills that it might be very powerful for us to develop, the only ones that I can think of that are more universal, are the capacity to dialogue, for example, with people that have a very radically different perspectives that we have on what is important. Because whatever change we want to make is going to be about navigating systems that are not designed for us, and sometimes encountering perspectives that are completely shifted and different. And I think that is definitely one that I can consider universal. The second one is the capacity to go back to our core, as I was mentioning earlier. Like, this capacity to say, okay, these are all the scripts that I know, and I don't even know where they come from. I don't know if they come from my family, from my culture, from Hollywood movies that really have very specific narratives and theories of change. But I have them. What else is there? What other story? Because those stories make less noise, of course, because they're less linear. But there is so many. I keep remembering, Harrison Ford, the Indiana Jones actor. He was a waiter up to 33 years old, and then he was discovered by someone that entered in that cafe. Like, we think these are the exception, but they're not that much of an exception, actually. So the capacity for us to decode and try to sit down and stay with our core is a very important and universal skill to develop, and especially when you do it in a place where we can learn with and from one another. Because I can assure there is a poem that I love that says, even when you think, it is in the context of, sometimes we feel that there is people that actually are going through life having it figured out. Like, they have figured out, it's so clear. Look at their social media, look at their press releases. But this poem is very powerful because it reminds us that nobody does. Nobody knows what they're doing. The poem goes like, life, I don't remember, word by word, but it's like, life is a garden. We enter and exit through the same door. What we notice in the garden matters more than where we're going, because we're not going anywhere. And I really, really believe in this, and in the fact that maybe choosing things that we notice and choosing things that we want to dedicate to that are about us and not about a story that was never ours to carry, and especially doesn't respond to the urgencies we have nowadays. I think that's another very important one. Everything else is going to be about your own talents and assets. Another one, the talents we have. The talents we have that we believe don't matter, or we don't recognize them because it's something that we did in a natural way. And it can be, and I truly believe this, it can be you're the type of person that people tell their secrets to, or that like to be holding space when they feel vulnerable. Imagine how powerful and impactful that is when you bring it in a big corporation or in a public sector where there is not that much social justice or there is not that much inclusion, and someone needs that support. That is a skill that might not be under your job title, but I can assure you it can be very, very impactful, especially when matched with people that then might want to propose a program for cultural inclusion or diversity. Like, there is skills and talents that we oversee so often that I believe are going to be crucial for these things that, again, our generation, that is not by age, but by values and passion, will need to bring everywhere in the most unthinkable professions and job titles or environments. So I would say these ones. Thank you for your question. It was a very important one.
Thank you very much.
So if anybody else wants to hop in.
I think you had one, Armel, right?
I did, yeah, but I just wanted to floor to somebody else first.
We have Taku, right?
Hi. Meg. Thank you for your presentation. I found it very insightful. I want to paraphrase you here. I might not get it exactly correct, but you used an analogy of a tree, and you said what we need to do is change the root system and not necessarily just move around branches.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in finding out, in trying to do that, how do those root changes impact, businesses and initiatives that you're working with? Because once you're rooted in old practices, how easy is it then to move them to a new system, a new way of thinking from this new root system?
It's an amazing question, and I will need to pull off the fact that I'm a daughter of a theologist to tell you that there is a symbol that really helps me explain this. It's part of the things that I talk about very much in Revolutionary and the other side of impact, because it's a little bit too far from the topics of impact on. But nevertheless, from Jewish religion, and in particular Kabbalah, for example, it's a very specific philosophy and spirituality you might have heard of. They have this symbol and this metaphor that is the tree being 1% and the roots being 99%. Similar to those images we might have seen on social media about icebergs, it's the same thing. But the root and the tree explains a little bit more the fact that what you're rooted in creates a change. But when we see that change, the actual world of the roots is much bigger, because it's not made just in how we do things, but it's much rooted in why we do them and why did we choose that specific set of values or priorities, etc. So when I talk about the roots and the branches and the fact that patching symptoms is evidently, trying to have an orange tree give you apple without changing the roots, pretty impossible, metaphorically speaking. Changing the roots for me means to go beyond, these are the practices. Because for me, the practice is actually, or how we do things is already like the trunk or the central part of the tree. The roots for me are the motives, the values, the things you stand for, the things you prioritize, and every single organization where you see a disconnection from what they say and what they create, normally it means that there is an incoherence between what they're doing and saying that they're doing, of course, which means that at the roots, there is something else. And it's very uncomfortable to be confronted with these things, because when you, for example, study, I think, Armel, you were mentioning earlier, when you start studying the roots, for example, of some of the United Nations projects or some of the NGO or aid world that we know, and you understand why, like what is the ultimate goal of why they do the things they do, you then understand why they have certain approaches. It's never the other way around. So when we talk about like transformation or change, we need to remember that to get to those roots takes much longer than try to patch symptoms. But it's the only way to create lasting change. And of course, the bigger the organization, the harder that it is. I've seen, though, and there is a story that I that I heard because I know someone did it. It's a sort of mentor of mine in Uganda, in Rwanda, when they were working in Kigali to the genocide memorial. It's similar to the Holocaust, but it's a genocide memorial. And close by, there was a reserve with gorillas, and there were a lot of activists that were trying to stop hunters from killing gorillas and selling them on the black market. You might be familiar. It happens on many wildlife and animals causes. The patching symptoms was to protest, or again, theory of change by clash, right? By conflict. I will prove you that you're wrong and you need to stop doing what you do. When they started understanding the actual why behind the hunters were doing it, which was to make money, they presented them a business plan of how much they would make having a natural reserve and paid safari for tourists. And they set up the reserve. They stopped killing gorillas because it was more profitable to actually keep them alive and having tourists come and see them. It's a very powerful story, and it's a very simple one. And of course, it might not always be so clear or logical to do these type of exercises, but it is possible for most of the organizations and the causes that we have in the world. And I think it's one of the most fundamental skills and muscles we need to learn, because sometimes the why behind the certain things are way simpler than we think. And the approach by contrast will never reach those roots, but other ways can. I hope I answered your question. I know that I became philosophical again.
Perfect answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Meg, I hope you don't mind if I do another question, but
I don't, but I will not leave without a Mel's question, just for you to know.
sure.
Please go ahead.
I was reading the other day a book from Rutger Bregman. I don't know if you know him.
Yes, of course.
Dutch.
We're part of the same community as well, of the Watercoming Farm, yes.
Okay. And he mentions this concept of limited bandwidth, of having a mental limited bandwidth.
Yes.
That for the ones who don't know is this idea of reshaping priorities according to threats. For example, a kid won't have as a priority education if his mom is dying for a preventable disease or so, any kind of example. So my question is, he mentions the example of education as one where you need to take care of other things before education, such as healthcare and security, for example. So do you think there's an order of priorities to address social issues? I mean, is there, for example, I would not consider someone being so concerned about climate change if they do not get out of poverty, for example. So is there an order that you think there are priorities to address social issues?
This is a very brilliant question, and we need approximately other 40 minutes to answer it. But I will try to keep it short. Yes and no, because, for example, we did a big study with students from 50 plus countries over the last few months. It stopped on Sunday. And when we asked what is the priority there for you, if you had a magic wand and you could, solve 3 big challenges, which ones would you solve? And in the middle of a pandemic, for example, healthcare or health didn't make it to the top 3. Climate change was much beyond that, to my aftershock, the health part, and animal and wildlife as well. So I say yes, I think there is priorities, but not the ones that we might think, because the priorities should be based on what we know about cognitive and bio and social and psychological laws that determine who we are. So, for example, if we are all celebrating the anti-malaria Gates and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation efforts, and of course they saved probably thousands, if not millions of lives by now. But we understand that they bring children from dying at 0 years old to 5 years old, and then they leave their programs. They leave the programs of the Gates. And you have thousands, if not millions of children in extremely poor countries with extremely hard conditions in having access to good nutrition and food, etc. So we know that those brains, the neuroplasticity of that brain, will stop developing after a while, and especially without access of healthy water, like good water and good food, the neuroplasticity will stop a lot before what it normally does in our part of the world, for example. And this is in countries in Africa, but don't get me wrong, periphery of Italy or Portugal is the same. Like poverty is poverty, and not access to healthy food is the same. So yes, there should be a priorities, in my opinion, that go back to the roots of who we are and how we function, because without that, anything else will not work. On the other side, it's harder to say which priorities, because everything is extremely interconnected when it comes to sustainability. Climate change is a lot about also poverty and the wipe away of different cultures from how we intend, how we think about economy and development and impact investment in certain places of the world. So it's very tricky, because I do think there is some aspects of how we do things that should be prioritized, and it's a little bit what I try to uncover in the other side of impact, like these deeper dimensions that we don't talk about. But at the same time, it's hard because all those that we call social or environmental charge are all sort of equally important. They need to have very well coordinated efforts. So it's a very, if you want it to be complicated, it's a paradox, but both are right.
Okay, thank you.
At least I think.
Thank you, Daniel, for your question as well. Super inspiring conversations. I'll just drop my question in now and then leave the floor to whoever still has some. Also more on the philosophical side, so I hope you have the time or the ability to be concise. You mentioned, and I thought it was a very new and refreshing approach to where impact comes from, kind of coming back to this idea of the Renaissance and kind of the underlying principles about how we see the world, and also therefore how we built our vision and kind of taking in of impact stories of who change makers are, etc. So kind of going back to that slide where you were looking at the archetypes of change makers and the models through which we see and experience and produce change making and impact. From all the work you've done across the world, working with different communities and different projects that are implementing, bringing to life social impact and social innovation, do you feel like those patterns, for example, the archetypes of change makers or the underpinning principles of behind change making are different in different areas of the world?
Very brilliant question. Yes, I will try to be concise so we can get more questions as well to answer. It's very powerful because some of the archetypes that we have are very common all over the world. For example, the archetype of the leader in general, historically, is always someone that has somehow enhanced capability to lead, be strong, and take care of others at the same time. It could be looking in different ways, right? In some of our cultures today is having more money and having powerful cars, but there is always this sort of powerful, strong strength archetype going on, which is actually crumbling, because we are figuring out that actually vulnerability is a lot stronger than rigid pyramidal approaches. But the free associations in our brain are actually quite common. Of course, they can be different in how they then develop in different communities, in different cultures, in different philosophies, but we have a lot of patterns. That's why the archetypes from the psychological perspective in Jungian psychology are very studied. In mythology, which is something that I'm researching more and more on because of the reasons I said, like we have very specific theories of change that are based on stories that are widely known, or hero journeys that are very linear, but that's not how most reality works. So I do think there is archetypes that are in common. I also think there is archetypes that we as Europeans or Americans, etc., we forced on other cultures, and we somehow made our stories being louder than others. So we might perceive as a generation that is less diversity because it was shaped this way in terms of development of stories. There is communities around the world that look at our, MacArthur Foundation or our efforts in circular economy, and they don't understand, because they're like, what do you mean you need to do that as an effort? Like, we've been doing this for thousands of years. It's called, regeneration, or not even, because it's very technical, but some of these communities, like, I fight for my land as if it was, there is this Francis Weller quote from a podcast that says, when you see Native Americans fighting for their land as if it's their life, it's because it is. Because for their perspectives and philosophy, there is no difference between them and nature, which is the story of separation that I was telling you about, that we as Europeans and Americans, we bought into. We forgot that interconnectedness is not just about not putting trash on the floor. It's about us as well. Life of land is my life, and vice versa. Which for many of us, or for many people that we might know, might sound crazy or woohoo or mind-bending, but it's a very reality of some of the communities around the world that we are more and more trying, not as of course directly, but as a culture, to wipe away in the name of a story that we consider better or more powerful. So it's tricky because yes, we do have some archetypes in common, but we also have predominant archetypes because we made them be predominant. And that's why encounters or meetings like this and initiatives like the ones that we are shaping together, like this one, and hopefully more in the future, where we want and we choose to learn other archetypes and embody them in our own way, actually have more power and more impact than what we think. Because the moment we take courage to embody a different story, we encourage and give courage to others to do the same. And it's very important for the times that we're in right now to have different stories and different theories of change and different types of change-making approaches that are not by conflict, because by now we know they don't work.
Thank you. That was really powerful, and I totally align with you about the fact that it's really time to explore other ways, and that's I think that this whole talk has been about as well. To everybody has in themselves a deep connection to issues that they want to solve. Also, a set of, as you were saying, talents and assets that are unique to them, and that therefore they can kind of wield as their own power to generate impact. And I'm really looking forward to see what
in one or more, I think it's a topic that I prepare for April or May, I don't remember, but on Revolutionary, on the other side of impact, it's the fact that we have these stories about heroes with swords. And for those of you that are nerd like I am, that I grew up with Star Wars and Matrix and all these things, all the Star Wars though. The swords normally are seen as these like tools of power. There is a whole series that I want to make on tools of power in stories, in myths, but also in our like computer or many other things. We'll get to that eventually if you want to join me. But it's interesting for me that the tools of powers of most of our hero journeys are a sword. Because a sword in some of the philosophies in the world, especially the laser one, the laser sword is a powerful symbol because it's energy, right? It's not iron or metal. It's a laser. It's condensed light that in some cultures means condensed consciousness or laser focused attention. And it's interesting because symbologically speaking, we, compared to other, if you think about other superheroes that do other stuff, the sword is a branch out, is in alignment, is a prolongation of our arm, our hands, which by definition are how we shape things. And we have many symbology in the history of art where the sword is kept close to the core, close to the chest. Because in theory, the hero, the enlightened hero, is the one that takes action with consciousness or with a magic wand, Gandalf being another symbol of that, as a direct extension of their heart, as a direct extension of their core, again, from Latin core, heart. It's not a tool of destruction, it's a tool of protection, it's a tool of setting the limit. It can become a stick. You might have seen Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf uses the stick to say, you shall not pass. I'm a gatekeeper, that's what I get to do, you will not pass. And that is a very powerful reflection, because we tend to see the swords, in many of the Hollywood movies or the series or etc., as this sort of, wounding tool. While there is another side to that story, which is, what does the sword theoretically stand for? And how can we use those myths, from Excalibur to Star Wars to whatever, to understand what is our version of the sword? What is our tool? What is our set of tools of power that we want to use in alignment with our core? So that, for example, is another of the things very nerdy that I explore for this sector.
I can't wait to read more about that. It's such a enlightened and again refreshing and different conversations to have. So I'm really happy to have you here to share that. I don't know if anyone else still wants. We can maybe take one last question.
Thank you for staying this long, especially.
Of course. No, nobody. Okay, well, in that case, I think I'll officially announce the session closed. I first of all really want to thank you, Meg, for taking the time to be with us today. I think it was just so powerful to have these kind of conversations, especially for our first impact story, to really, as you mentioned, kind of try and think about where impact comes from, how do we think about impact and why, and build those foundations, go to the roots to then be able to bloom in our own impact stories later on. So I'm super, super grateful to have had the pleasure to hear you and to share you with the world. And I also invite everybody, of course, if you've enjoyed this conversation, to check out Revolutionary and sign up to all the newsletters. It's really great kind of question. Also, it will make you ask yourself those questions that I was mentioning earlier about yourself and your place and how you can step into your impact and change-making role. So again, thank you so much. For everybody who is interested, of course, we'll be having now these impact stories every other week. So the next one will be on the 17th of March with Joe Santos from Ventura-Tismo, who will tell a very different story of his impact, moving from a very kind of corporate, traditional, linear journey to kind of flip it all upside down and move into much more empathetic, compassion-led organization. And I invite you all to be there. We will be sending out, of course, on all of our channels, the invitations, the links, the registration, and we hope to see very, very many of you there. And again, thank you so much also, Sophia, Leonore, and Lisa, for all your support in organizing this and setting this up. And I really hope to see most of your faces or names in our next session in 2 weeks. And again, Meg, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Really, like, any question, any idea, I'm very findable online, so just shoot. I use a lot of Instagram, I use a lot of my website and email. Thank you for this opportunity, because I think that this as well is an act of courage. And the way in which you guys, or you ladies, better said in this case, Armel, Sophia, Danielle, etc., Leonore, are creating the space for different types of conversation to happen, I think is very, very precious. So thank you so much for having me and allowing me to be a little bit of the pioneer of these talks. And whatever thing you will want to explore in the future, absolutely count on me.
Thank you. And then everybody, I wish you a really, really nice evening. Hopefully enjoy the next couple of days of sunshine for those of you who are down here in Lisbon and everywhere else, I hope. And yeah, goodbye.